Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be showing you guys a couple future realistic 2028 potential matchups between the Democrats and Republicans. I have two maps. One is going to be, I believe, the strongest ticket for the Democrats and Josh Shapiro, who will be facing Vivek Ramaswamy. And the other one, or the second matchup, in my opinion, would probably be more realistic or probably the safer bet. And that's Gavin Newsom versus Ron DeSantis. And if you do not know, they actually debated several months ago. But before we get started with the maps, make sure you guys are subscribed, click the bell so you don't miss out on my content, press like button, give this video a thumbs up. Also, if you're interested, you can find a link to the memberships in the description section. So let's start off with this map. Josh Shapiro, who is the governor, I believe, from Pennsylvania, so I believe he will perform better in these Rust Belt states. That can really go to his benefits. I think he can really build back that blue wall that the Democrats have been looking for, but they have not seen because Joe Biden is their nominee. Now, I strongly do believe that for Democrats to have a bright future, they need to get rid of Biden, first of all, and second of all, they need to put in Josh Shapiro as their future nominee. Gavin Newsom, in my opinion, is one of the worst candidates for them. I also do think that Gretchen Whitmer would be strong in the Rust Belt. She obviously will overwhelmingly win her own home state of Michigan. So I also do think that anyone from the Rust Belt will probably have that electoral map advantage, including Josh Shapiro and Gretchen Whitmer. I think Gavin Newsom is one of the worst because he comes from California, and I just don't believe that he's going to do well in some of these Rust Belt states where it matters the most. So let's begin with some of these swing and battleground states. So right off the bat, I do think Vivek Ramaswamy can do well in some of these pro-MAGA states, like Florida is very pro-MAGA. He's not part of the establishment, he's an outsider, he's not a politician, so he kind of correlates to the Trump MAGA base, if you know what I'm saying. So right off the bat, he's from Ohio, so he's going to win his home state by over 10 percentage points comfortably by a solid margin, as well as Iowa. This is a safe, solid Republican state, especially in 2028. This state keeps going redder. And as for Florida, I think he'll perform very well. Just like I mentioned earlier, it's a pro-MAGA state, and I think Vivek Ramaswamy will win it by a margin of somewhere between 7 to 10 percentage points. It's going to be likely for him ultimately at the end of the day. I also do think that Maine's 2nd congressional district will be likely for Ramaswamy. I do think he will slightly underperform Donald Trump in this state. I do think Josh Shapiro will perform very strongly in the state of Maine. And now moving on to the likely states for Josh Shapiro. I do think he'll win his home state of Pennsylvania right off the bat by a comfortable, likely margin of probably 6 to 7 percentage points. I just think he would perform very strongly and well in the state of Pennsylvania. Me personally, I do like Josh Shapiro. I might even consider supporting him if he is the nominee. I think places like Erie County, which is usually close, would support him better than any other candidate. And also, he would run up the numbers in some of these stronghold Democratic counties like Philadelphia and the Pittsburgh suburbs. The suburbs are very important, especially in 2024 as well. And I believe Josh Shapiro performed very well in Central County. That is very important. Even a state like Virginia, in my opinion, can actually be safe, arguably, for Josh Shapiro. I think he's that strong. That's why I think he should be the nominee for 2028 for the Democrats. As for Vivek Ramaswamy, he obviously would perform very well with younger voters, the youth vote. I see people on TikTok saying that they don't usually vote, but they will consider Vivek Ramaswamy, and I think that can also help him in 2028, and it'll really drive some turnout. But when it comes to the swing and battleground states, it might not help him because Josh Shapiro is that much good of a strong candidate, but I do think specifically Virginians will love Josh Shapiro. I also do think that Colorado would be safe for Josh Shapiro. I think he would win it by like about 13 points if you were to have an estimated margin. I also do think that New Mexico will be comfortable for him. He would likely win that by probably 8 to 9 percentage points. I just think both of those states would really love someone like Josh Shapiro on the Democratic ticket. Colorado is actually getting bluer. Believe it or not, they keep gaining in terms of new Democratic voters. So I think Josh Shapiro will perform very strongly in both New Mexico and Colorado. I do think Albuquerque is a Democratic stronghold. Obviously, will really turn out for Josh Shapiro, and it's going to be hard for Vivek Ramaswamy to overcome the votes, and Albuquerque has a lot of white liberals. And two more likely states for Shapiro, I do think both Minnesota and New Hampshire will be likely for him and comfortable. He would probably win Minnesota by about 7 percentage points, as well as New Hampshire by probably somewhere in between there, 7 to 8%, maybe if he's lucky enough. I'm going to be honest, I think especially in New Hampshire, Vivek Ramaswamy will perform horrible in that state. I just don't think they like that type of candidate. They would probably like more of a probably establishment, I would say. They don't really favor someone Vivek Ramaswamy, who is probably, I would say, pro-MAGA. New Hampshire voters will not like that whatsoever. I think New Hampshire would really support Josh Shapiro, and especially Minnesota. This state's getting bluer, but the reason why you don't see that in this election is because Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee on the top of the ticket. If you replace him with any other Democratic candidate, especially Josh Shapiro, Minnesota will overwhelmingly back the Democrats in 2028. Minneapolis and the suburbs here are getting bluer. Also, suburban women really would turn out for Josh Shapiro. Vivek Ramaswamy, in my opinion, would just perform very poorly. Lean states, I do think Texas will be the only lean state for Vivek Ramaswamy. This state actually could get closer in the future, but the reason why it's not in 2024, this election, is because Joe Biden is the nominee and Donald Trump is the nominee. So we all know that Texans do not like Joe Biden of a candidate. But as for the lean states for Josh Shapiro, I do think he'll win Michigan by probably 4 to 5 percentage points. Arizona, I do think that Arizona is getting bluer. They just elected a Democratic governor, Katie Hobbs, in 2022 for the first time since, I believe, 2009. They also have a Democratic senator. So basically, statewide, Arizona is controlled by Democrats overall. And I do think Josh Shapiro, being so strong of a candidate, can really drive out the turnout in Maricopa, because Maricopa County is really going to decide this state entirely. And when it comes to the Republican Party of Arizona, a lot of them actually are neocons, establishment, and rhinos. That's why they love Mitt Romney. That's why they love John McCain. And main reason why Biden won Arizona in 2020 is because the Republican Party there just doesn't like populism. And Vivek Ramaswamy being a populist candidate, it's not going to go well with Arizona Republicans. And so I think a lot of them can actually switch over to Josh Shapiro. So that's where I think he can really perform very strongly in. And also independent voters and undecideds, Josh Shapiro will win overwhelmingly a majority of them as well. For Michigan, when we talk about establishing the blue wall, obviously Josh Shapiro comes from Pennsylvania, so he'll perform very well with some of these Rust Belt states. I think Michigan is the bluest Rust Belt state out of the three. I think places like Detroit, also suburban women, will really turn out for Josh Shapiro. It'll drive voters to the polls because he's that much of a good candidate, and Vivek Ramaswamy, in my opinion, will be weak when it comes to, I would say, some of these Rust Belt states because he's seen more as a MAGA candidate, and that's not going to really pair well with some of these Rust Belt voters. It's going to come down to the blue-collar workers, the college-educated voters, which I think Josh Shapiro can perform very well with. And this is kind of out of the blue, but I do think that Alaska would actually be likely. It's going to get way closer, but still Ramaswamy would probably come out with the victor of like 7 to 8 percentage points at the end of the day. I just think in 2028 this state can get slightly closer, but Vivek Ramaswamy would still win it. Move on to the tilt states before we move on to the second prediction. Starting off with Vivek, I do think he'll win Georgia by a tilt margin, as well as North Carolina and even a state like Nevada. I think those would be the 3 tilt states for Ramaswamy. I think Shapiro will perform very well in the Atlanta metropolitan area, in the state of Georgia, as well as Savannah. And I think he can do very well with black support, black voters as well. I think Vivek Ramaswamy would struggle because this state really doesn't like, pro-Trumpy candidates. You saw in 2022, they voted for Brian Kemp, but they rejected Herschel Walker, who was a Trump-backed endorsed candidate. And I understand he was facing a lot of, scandals as well. But I do think someone like Vivek would not do well in Georgia, as well as North Carolina. I think that's where Josh Shapiro can perform very well in, and so he would probably beat Ramaswamy. So the tilt states for Shapiro is going to be Wisconsin, and that's pretty much the only one. I also do think that Nebraska's 2nd congressional district would be likely for Shapiro. But as for Wisconsin, I think he can really run up the numbers in Milwaukee, as well as win Door County. And places like Green Bay, I don't expect Vivek Ramaswamy to perform very well. And there, I just think Josh Shapiro would get a lot of turnout because he would really do well with some of these Rust Belt voters. If this was the matchup in 2028, I do think this would be the strongest ticket for the Democrat side. 281 electoral votes for Josh Shapiro. I personally like him as a candidate as well. And Vivek Ramaswamy's 257 electoral votes. So let me know what states you agree with or disagree with in the comment section down below and your overall thoughts on the map. Now we move on to the second potential matchup, which I think personally this is the more realistic and safer bet. I really don't think Gavin Newsom has pretty much any ground he can game from. I do think that Ron DeSantis would overwhelmingly win his state of Florida by probably 15 to maybe 20%. It will reject Newsom because if you actually know, a lot of people fleeing or leaving the state of California, moving away from it, are either moving to Arizona, Nevada, but majority of them are going to Texas and Florida. And I think a lot of Floridians hate Gavin Newsom because of what he did to the state if they actually moved to Florida, which a lot of them did. So I think Floridians would reject Gavin Newsom. I also do think DeSantis would perform very well in states like Ohio and Iowa, pretty much lost causes for the Democratic Party. Those states have totally abandoned the Democrats. But I do think areas where Newsom can perform very strongly or well in are Colorado and New Mexico, which I think will overwhelmingly back Newsom and support him. I just think those states don't really like DeSantis as a candidate overall. Likely states would probably be Texas for Ron DeSantis. I think, just like I mentioned, a lot of people fleeing California are moving to Texas, and that's what really could drive the turnout from Ron DeSantis. Even though they might not like DeSantis as a candidate, they would just vote for him to prevent Newsom from touching that Oval Office because he's so disastrous of a candidate, especially how he ruined California. I just don't see how Gavin Newsom can perform very well in a state like Maine. He's not even from there. He's from, all the way to California. That's like very far. I think DeSantis would probably do slightly better. Also, Maine's at large would be likely instead of safe for Newsom because he's not going to perform very well in the state of Maine, in my opinion. And I also do think Gavin Newsom would win Minnesota by a likely margin. Just like I mentioned earlier for Josh Shapiro, I think a lot of the suburbs here and Minneapolis are shifting towards the left. Minnesota is actually getting bluer. And I think in terms of improvement for Newsom, I think he can do very well among suburban women. And as for the lean states for Ron DeSantis, I do think Georgia and North Carolina would be lean for him. I just don't see a realistic scenario in which Newsom performs good in North Carolina or Georgia. I just don't see it. Especially considering Florida borders the state of Georgia, I really do think he can perform very well in some of these places like Georgia and North Carolina specifically. And as well as Nevada is also going to be lean for DeSantis. I think he would win that by probably 3 percentage points. DeSantis can perform very well in Washoe County as well as run up the numbers in Clark County, so he would probably be able to win this state. And the lean states for Newsom, I think, are going to be 2, Virginia and New Hampshire. I just don't see a realistic scenario in which DeSantis performs well in New Hampshire. I just don't see it. I don't think they really like a candidate like DeSantis. Even though Newsom's not going to do well, I still think New Hampshire voters would prefer him over someone like DeSantis. And lastly, we move on to the tilt states before we end off this video. So I do think Gavin Newsom would narrowly win the state of Michigan as well as pull off the state of Pennsylvania, which would not quite get him past 270. Keep in mind, we have Wisconsin and Arizona, in which Newsom is not going to win, in my opinion. I do think DeSantis wins Wisconsin as well as Arizona, because when it comes to Arizona, I do think a lot of people leaving California are moving into Arizona, and Newsom really pisses them off and irritates them because of what he did to California, and they can just reject. They would still vote DeSantis because it would prevent Newsom from ever touching that Oval Office. And I do think DeSantis can perform very well with the neocons, the establishment, and the rhinos because he gives off that very establishment vibe. I think DeSantis can perform very well in places like Maricopa where it matters the most. But as for the Rust Belt, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, I just don't see how DeSantis realistically can actually pull off those states. I just don't see it. Michigan's getting bluer. The reason why it doesn't seem that way in this election in 2024 is because Joe Biden once again is the nominee. If you replace him, I think Democrats would be way better off. And even in Pennsylvania, I just don't see how DeSantis can win that state. I just don't see it. And there you guys go. And also, I do think that Nebraska's second is going to be lean for Gavin Newsom at the end of the day. So 278 electoral votes for Ron DeSantis to 260 for Gavin Newsom. This would be actually really close, believe it or not. So let me know what states you agree with or disagree with and your overall thoughts on the map on the comment section. And don't forget to subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss out on my content. Press the like button, give this video a thumbs up. And we also do have memberships. You can find a link to that in the description section. That is pretty much it. Let me know which map you agree with more.